I was having dinner many years ago, and I saw something incredible. I was at L'Ami Louis in Paris. I was a line cook at the time, out for dinner with my Uncle Steve, who wanted me to experience real cooking, by which I think he meant delicious food uncoupled from fanciness, which is what L'Ami Louis is all about. Worn-out tiles on the floor, decades of smoke staining the walls, misted windows, a bustling bistro with lots of food. Actually, at L'Ami Louis, the portion sizes for the food are ridiculous. You order something there, and it's for 2 or 3 or more. And it's rich food. A reviewer once wrote, "You can experience anticipatory heart attacks by just making reservations." So my uncle and I, we settled in on sharing the classics. We ordered the foie gras terrine, which turned out to be this concrete slab of duck liver pate. And we ordered the famous roast chicken. Imagine your Thanksgiving turkey butterflied and slapped down on a plate with the 9 pounds of butter that it took to cook it. And we had this like Freedom Tower thing of shoestring potato fries. It was awesome. And I took a minute to soak in the energy and the history of the place, the magic of L'Ami Louis. And I had a thought that I think ranks as a revelation for a young line cook anyway at the time, which is that the food, how it's cooked, how it's plated, the food, it's not everything. It's one slice of the pleasure pie that we call the restaurant experience. Now, I know you all know that. That's why we have the Welcome Conference, to remind a chef like me that it is not all about a chef like me. At one point in the meal, I looked a couple tables away, and I saw a woman dining alone. She was 60 or 65. She wore a beautiful red dress. She had incredible posture. And I don't remember much else about her. But I do remember exactly what she ate. She ordered for herself the foie gras terrine, that concrete slab of duck liver pate. And for herself, she ordered the gargantuan roast chicken with the 9 pounds of butter. And for herself, she had the stack of shoestring potato fries. And she had a glass of white with the foie and a glass of red with the chicken. And I watched her eat. She was like the most mindful eater, dialed in to the food. And as I kept watching her, I started to realize that the reason she was so at one with her food was because what was happening around her was amazing. The choreographed dance of service, the kind of stuff that you guys do every night so brilliantly. The kind of stuff you guys do so brilliantly most nights. It was the just me's knife before the chicken arrived. It was the extra splash of red wine before the dish was finished. The folded napkin, the crumb table. It was beautiful. As beautiful to watch as if you're sitting there watching the Paris Opera Ballet or something. So mesmerizing were these steps of service that I nearly forgot to notice that this woman was polishing off all of her food. She ate it all. And when she was finished, she got up from the table. And 10 minutes later, she returned. The waiter was there with the chair pulled out. No words were exchanged, not even a glance. Just another glass of white wine was poured. Right before, I swear to God, her second order of foie gras arrived. Followed by her second order of the roast chicken with the 9 pounds of butter and the Freedom Tower stack of shoestring potato fries. It was bananas. She ate the second meal just like she ate the first. She was served the second meal just like she was served the first. A repeat performance. all of her needs attended to with great care and respect and restraint. This woman sounds like a myth. Actually, it turns out she's a regular. I learned that from the waiter. She always dines alone. She always orders the same thing. And she always has the same meal twice. I didn't get much else out of the waiter. The French invented what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. So. But what struck me about the meal, what has stayed with me all these years, wasn't the spectacle of this woman and the superhuman proportions of the food that she ate. No. And it wasn't happiness because there was no banging on the table exuberance. There was something deeper and richer. It was real pleasure. Take the energy of the place, the artfulness of the room and the service, the incredible food, blend it together. And it was more than the sum of its parts. What I realized is while this woman was dining by herself, she was not eating alone. She was connected to a community that comes together and reinvents itself every time we open up our doors for service. For this woman, that created the most restorative meal, which is why the restaurant was invented in the first place, actually just a stone's throw away from L'Ami Louis, sometime in the 1700s in downtown Paris. Actually, before that, as we learned earlier, a restaurant was a thing to eat before it was a place to go. It was named after a bowl of soup, a broth, literally a restorative. But you could go out to eat in the 1700s, but you were restricted to like table d'hôtes. And from what I understand, they were pretty raucous affairs, sort of like trying to have dinner at a frat party. If you're a woman, you couldn't go at all. So a restaurant was invented. Yeah, you often came alone, but you dined at long communal tables, connected. And you were fed a soup, a meaty, rich broth meant to restore and refresh. You might seek out a restorative in the same way that we like sign up for a massage today. And there it was, right in its first incarnation, the restaurant as sanctuary, more than the sum of its parts. Eventually, though, the magic turns in on itself. Somewhere along the way, restaurants and fine dining become exclusive, ponderous, and pretty soon insufferable. You know what I'm talking about. Fine dining gets hitched to fanciness. Places with a le or a la in front of their name. Actually, a lot of those were located a stone's throw from where we're sitting today, in Midtown Manhattan, where waiters wore tuxedos, sommeliers wore scowls. They still do that. And maitre d's just made you feel like shit. These were the kind of places that were like, instead of saying come in, they were saying stay out. And the weird thing is, like, the fancier the place got, the worse the food was. Until a small group of influential French chefs blew it all up. These nouvelle cuisine chefs like Michel Guérard, the Trois Gros brothers, Alain Chapelle, and of course the ringleader of them all, Paul Bocuse. They created a whole new style of cooking. Smaller portions, artful plating. And also, less famously, they pledged allegiance to the morning market. These chefs were really all about seasonal and local. They were the first farm-to-table chefs. But more importantly, they launched modern gastronomy. And it forced the front of the house to become a little less formal. Slowly, imperceptibly, but I think inevitably, restaurants had to loosen up, to the point that you could experience a fine dining meal without choking on ritual and reverence. Fast forward to today, to the disciples of these nouvelle cuisine chefs and the disciples of the disciples. And these chefs are opening up restaurants that are aggressively unpretentious. There's like an arms race on informality. No reservations, no backs on chairs, Christmas lights for decorations. Oh, you want silverware? Get it yourself. Except you actually stand an even chance of having one of the best dining experiences of your life at one of these places. In this like fine dining journey into the upside down, it's worth keeping in mind for a moment that the last 20 years have been the golden age for restaurants, the golden age. They've opened in the most unlikely places, they sourced the most extraordinary ingredients, and they've attracted the most exceptional people. The golden age, which is great for all of us. But can I just like jiu-jitsu an idea into all of this right now? Which is that for us, the larger we, America, we are not living in the golden age. We're living in the crazy cakes age. This like weird cultural moment. And I'm not talking about Trump. I'm talking about our not talking to each other. I'm talking about the absence of real community and real connection. I'm talking about the stuff that we all know all too well. That our everyday lives are not about who we engage with. They're about the negotiations and decisions that we make online. We text, we email, we upload now more than ever. But we're like lonelier now more than ever. And we're more unhappy now than we ever have been. Experts say this all the time. They're writing about this all the time. And what's interesting is the prescription. What do you do about the prescription? It boils down to sort of the same thing. Find or create a sanctuary space. A place where there's no internet, where you can't really use your cell phone, where there's no headphones allowed, where you can't erase or bury your head in a computer screen, where you are forced into some kind of connection with the person sitting across from you, or at the very least, to be at one with your surroundings. These people are talking about a restaurant. I mean, we don't need to create anything. We don't need to create the solution. We are the solution. I mean, who does this? What institution, what group of people encourage the kind of engagement in a context of delight and pleasure and hedonism every single service that satisfy this hardwired craving for real community and real connection? And by the way, not just with each other. Restaurants can satisfy our hardwired craving for knowing more about where our food comes from, who's growing it, and how they're growing it. No, I'm not going to get all kumbaya on you right now and talk to you about the small farmer and local and sustainable and blah, 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 blah. What do you think this is, a fucking meal at Blue Hill? No, if we're talking about our dining room tables filling the void of our broken communities, how could we not include agriculture and farming communities? If fine dining tables, or our dining room tables in general, create culture, dining room tables can also create the right kind of agriculture. And all of a sudden, the community's a lot larger. What we need to do is explain to our diners how what they're tasting on their plates is directly connected to what's happening in the field and the pasture. I saw how this might work in the most amazing way a few years ago. I got a call from Chef Alain Ducasse's office. Chef Ducasse wanted to visit Blue Hill at Stone Barns. It was a few years after we opened. And I was totally thrilled. The hero chef is going to come and eat at Blue Hill. Well, we got close to the date, and I spoke to the assistant, and there had been some terrible miscommunication. Because Ducasse wasn't coming for dinner. He was coming for a sunrise photo shoot on the farm. I think the assistant heard the amazing disappointment in my voice. And she said, well, you know, there is a slot from 7 a.m. to 7:20 if you wanted to serve Monsieur Ducasse something to eat. Great, I said. I went with bread and butter. I was particularly excited about the butter because the butter is connected to Blue Hill Farm. The farm my brother David and I took over from our grandmother. and reconfigured it into an all-pasture dairy. Cows don't get a lick of grain. They eat only grass, which means that the quality of the milk and the cream and the butter is all dependent on the quality of the pasture. And since we had done so much work to improve the pasture, I felt like the quality of the butter was better than ever, and I wanted to share it with Chef Ducasse. So the big day arrives. There he is at the pass in my kitchen, spreading the butter on the just-baked bread. He took several minutes to eat the slice of bread. Was it several minutes? I don't know. It felt like several hours. At one point, he took off his glasses, he closed his eyes, and it was as if he was trying to vault himself back to being a child on his own dairy farm where he grew up. Some kind of like Ratatouille moment or whatever. When he was done, he looked at me and he said, "Thank you, and great." You know how someone says to you, "Great," and they don't really mean great? How was your meal? Great. No, it wasn't. C'est bon. That's like, it's a universal thing. It's clear that Mr. Ducasse did not find the butter to be the best butter of his life. He may not even found it to be good at all. So I had a choice. Shake his hand and end the conversation, or go for it. Ask him. When, I thought to myself, would I ever have the opportunity to ask him this again? When would I have the opportunity to have the greatest chef of our generation at the pass in my kitchen? The disciple, the most famous disciple of the most famous Nouvelle Cuisine chefs. When would I have this chance again? So I went for it. I said, "Mr. Ducasse, please help me understand how the butter could be better. What is it that you actually don't love?" Well, he argued. He said, "I love it. It's great." And I had to push. I pushed so hard. And finally, I wore him down, and he looked at me and said, "Actually, I have a question for you." I said, "Please." He said, "Has it been raining often at Blue Hill Farm?" Well, actually, it had been 2 weeks of torrential downpours. It was in the middle of Hurricane Irene. He did not know that. He had just gotten off a plane from Japan the night before. But what Mr. Ducasse, Chef Ducasse, was saying was that the butter tasted washed out, and why not? The milk is 100% dependent on the quality of the grass. Without a lick of grain, if the grass is washed out, the milk is washed out, the cream is washed out, and the butter is washed out. Dude could taste the weather. And he turned to leave, and he turned around again. And he said, "I have another question for you." I said, "Please." He said, "Was the butter made by hand, or was it made in an electric mixer?" Ever so gently indicating that he felt like the butter had been made in an electric mixer. But I cut him off right at the end of that, and I said, "No, Mr. Ducasse, the butter was made by hand because I know when you make it in an electric mixer, you whip in a lot of air. The viscosity is wrong. The unctuousness on the tongue is wrong. So no, our butter is only made by hand at Blue Hill." He nearly apologized for offending me with the suggestion. And then he walked out the door, and he turned around again, Columbo style. He said, "I've got one last question for you." He said, "The butter that I ate, was that from cows that were pasturing on a field near the barn, or were they pasturing on a field far away from the barn?" I didn't even know that was a question. So I said just very quickly, "No, the cows were pasturing near the barn, because I always see them near the barn." He shook my hand, and that was the end of my visit from Chef Alain Ducasse. But a week later, I was up in the pastry kitchen, and out of the corner of my eye, I saw the new intern making the butter in an electric mixer. I went over to the intern. I said, "Excuse me, what are you doing?" Actually, what I said is, "What the fuck are you fucking doing?" And the intern turned to me and said, "Chef, I've discovered that I can make the butter a lot faster in an electric mixer." A week and a half later, I was up at Blue Hill Farm. I was at the barn. I was looking out over the beautiful expanse of Blue Hill Farm, the pasture acres of southern Berkshire County. I didn't see any cows. And I turned to Sean, the farmer. I said, Sean, where are the cows? And he said, oh, I am trying an experiment for last month. I am pasturing them in field 7, the furthest field away from the barn. I said, Sean, why are you doing that? And he said, because the field furthest away from the barn, pasture 7, is in the worst shape. Tons of weeds, bad health. I wanted the cows to get the manure on there and bring it back to the health that you were looking at right here, the pasture right by the barn. I went on to learn something that owning a dairy farm I should probably know, which is that it's human nature. If you're a dairy farmer at 5 o'clock in the morning, you are least inclined to walk your cows out 1.5 miles to field number 7. What you do is keep them closest to the barn. And the grass closest to the barn, the fields closest to the barn, are the most fertilized, the most diverse, the healthiest, resulting in the fattiest milk and cream and the most delicious butter. So Ducasse could taste field 7. We can't all be Ducasse. The man is a Jedi. It's humbling just to think about what he knows intuitively on his tongue. But it's also instructive to think about what's possible for a meal. Whether we're eating foie gras at a Paris bistro or bread and butter at a kitchen pass, a meal can extend far beyond a plate of food. What we need are translators, facilitators. I'm looking out at the best of them right now. Translators for the knowledge that Mr. Ducasse owns. And facilitators in the way that those waiters at L'Ami Louis facilitated the most unobtrusive and restorative meal for that woman. To get to something more fundamental and even more restorative, real community. I mean that in the largest sense of the word. Communion with each other and the world around us. Our jobs really are to get away from this idea of restaurants as places of escape from our harried and hectic lives, and use our power, our work, to help mold them back into their original intent. Restaurants as places of connection. Thank you.